Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Good. Hello? Testing? Nothing? I got it. I got it. Whoa, I got it. Believe it or not, I actually speak internationally. I spoke in February in Paraguay and in March in Nebraska. And if that doesn't qualify as speaking internationally, I don't know. But move over. Well, this is going to kind of be a demonstration, and we're going to have to play with it a little bit because instead of having a cordless mic, we're on a cord. But I'd like to thank everybody so much for your prayers and your thoughts for Debbie and I over the last 2.5 years. It was a rough journey, and you're going to hear a little bit about that tonight. But just thank you for all your thoughts and prayers and phone calls and letters. And Debbie and I thought, how could we pay the community of Raton back? And part of it was to join Relay, and so I want to thank all of you for being here as part of Relay, and I certainly want to thank Vanna and the rest of the leadership team and all their hard work. You come to an event like this and you participate and you have fun and you do a great work and then you go home, but until you're able to be part of the behind the scenes and see how everything is put together, you really don't know how much hard work goes into this process and for an entire year. And so I want to just say a special thank you to the leadership team, and if you see them around, shake their hands and hug their necks and tell them thank you. But yes, the Survivors Tent is behind you. I want to thank Rocky Mountain Physical Therapy for sponsoring that. Ted and Tracy did a great job, and would like to get started by introducing my wife, Debbie. But first, you've had Raton a relay for 15 years, and for several years Rocky Mountain had a team, and we would come out and I would do laps, and I would do laps, and I would do laps. I would do dozens, 50, 60, 70 laps. So I'd go all night long, and yet I never got a purple shirt. And I kept saying, how many laps? And I kept saying to myself, next year I'm going to get a purple shirt. I do more laps, and the next year I do more laps. And I never got a purple shirt. And then Mercy, one day, I asked Mercy, I said, I know I walked further than you, and yet you have a purple shirt. How do I get a purple shirt? And she says, you don't want to know what it takes to have to get a purple shirt. Well, I have joined the ranks of the purple shirts. And she was right. You don't want to know what you have to do to earn a purple shirt. But we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in just a few minutes. But first, I would like to introduce Debbie, and we're on a short leash.
Well, thank you, Eric. It is my privilege tonight to speak for the caregivers. You know, we are a special group of people. We don't volunteer for this position, kind of like tonight. I didn't volunteer to speak. Eric pretty much voluntold me that I would be speaking tonight. So anyway, as caregivers, we have a special role. Our loved one is fighting a difficult battle, and we are behind them, literally many times, supporting them, encouraging them, doing medications, whatever it takes to help our loved one along this journey. And so I'm here to encourage you, the caregivers, and lift you up and hopefully give you a little bit of hope as you travel along this journey with your loved one.
She's not done. She's not done. She'll be back. These were supposed to be behind us, but now they're in front of us. And maybe you've wondered why there's 3 stools up here. Well, these 3 stools represent, when you think about it, almost every aspect in our lives. If you think about an event or a time in your life, these 3 stools can represent that time. There's the beginning, there's the middle, and there's the end. It doesn't matter whether you're going to school, you start in kindergarten, you spend all this time going to school in the middle, like 8th grade was 3 of my favorite years, and then, okay, if I need to repeat some of them, just raise your hand, okay? Just, try to keep up. I know it's hot out there, but try to keep up. And then there's commencement, there's graduation. And then you start another journey all over. Maybe it's college, maybe it's your career. But most of your time in a journey is spent in the middle. But everybody out there has a story. Everybody out there has a journey. And that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to share a little bit of our journey. My journey started back in the fall of 2013. I was in really excellent shape. I was running marathons. I was doing Tough Mudders. In fact, in September of that year, I had just qualified for the Worlds in the Tough Mudder. And that is a half marathon race full of obstacles. And I qualified to go to the Worlds. But by November, I wasn't feeling very well. And I just kept putting it off and putting it off. And finally, one day, I bent down to tie my shoes and I passed out. And I thought, that's not good. So I scheduled an appointment with the physician and I went in and I saw her. And she said, Eric, your blood pressure is absolutely through the roof. Well, you got to understand, in June, I had run a marathon and had a physical and everything was fine. 6 months later, my blood pressure is absolutely through the roof. So they put me on high blood pressure medication for 30 days and I went back to the doctor and she said, great news, your blood pressure has changed. It's even higher. So they put me on another set of blood pressure medications. So now I'm taking 2, but I'd bend over to tie my shoes, I'd be at work, I'd get dizzy, I was passing out, and I started having these terrible headaches. Well, long story short, we started going to doctor after doctor after doctor after doctor, and maybe some of you can relate to that. Well, being in the medical profession for 25 years, I certainly didn't like being on the other side of the fence. And they would run a test and they would say, oh, you have lead poisoning. And they'd run another test and they say, oh, you have endocrine issues, your endocrine system is crashed. And they'd run another test and they said, well, we think you have a rare form of West Nile, you have this rare virus. And then finally they decided that I had a brain tumor. And so I went and I had an MRI and they said, well, we have great news. You don't have a brain tumor. The bad news is we have no idea why you're having these headaches so bad. But this is April of 2014 and the headaches were so debilitating by that time, I couldn't go to work. I couldn't go to practice. I was sleeping 15 to 16 hours a day. My wife was helping me walk to the bathroom sometimes, and that was on a good day. And so finally, in November of that year, I saw my second or third neurologist. And he plugs the MRI in that everybody else had looked at, and he said, Eric, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is I know what's wrong with you. The bad news is you have a massive meningoencephalocele. And I said, Gesundheit. And he goes, no, that's what you have. you have a massive hole in your head, you have a huge cerebral spinal fluid leak, and you have meningitis. He said, we have to do surgery immediately.
So I was pretty thrilled. We actually had MRI evidence that he did have a brain, but now all of a sudden we realized it was leaking out from his nose. Anyway, Eric's in the first chair now. We've got a diagnosis, but I'm already over here in the middle. I'm saying, hey, we're moving down this road. We've had a year and a half of not knowing, and many of you have been on that journey where you didn't know what was wrong. Your loved one was sick, you were frustrated. You actually wondered, were they really crazy in their head? Were they just depressed? Yeah, we all know that Eric was crazy, but you struggle with that frustration. You struggle with that anger of not knowing. Well, now we had a diagnosis and I could really be a caregiver. I was super excited. The one problem, the doctor told me that I was going to have to put Eric's shoes and socks on for 6 weeks because he couldn't bend over. So you have to understand, 27 years ago, 28 years ago, when I met Eric, his father had several back surgeries and could not bend over and put his shoes and socks on. So he would pay his grandchildren 25 cents to put his shoes and socks on. I said, Eric, you better stay in good shape because I'm never doing that. So the first thing I did is I went to Cabela's and I bought a pair of Crocs. He can slip his shoes on and I don't have to put his shoes and socks on. The one mistake I made, almost every surgical patient comes home with these great big long socks. Anybody they're white and they're really stretchy, called Ted hose. Have you ever tried to put Ted hose on a size 12? Not fun. Anyway, we had finally got a diagnosis. The doctor assured us that everything, all the problems he was having were going to be cured by this one surgery. Woohoo! I'm sliding on over here to this last chair.
So I go in to have brain surgery, and the physician says, I see the surgeon. So I saw the neurologist, and now I'm seeing the surgeon, and he takes one look at all the tests, and I see him on a Tuesday, and he said, we have to do surgery immediately. And I said, great, what are you doing this afternoon? And he goes, no, you don't understand. This is a major, major surgery. And I said, no, you don't understand. I've dealt with this thing for over a year. You skip lunch and schedule me for surgery. I'm ready to go. And he didn't. We had surgery on Friday, and a little 20-minute procedure turned into 2.5 hours. It was the largest cerebral spinal fluid leak they'd ever seen. I was losing half a cup of cerebral spinal fluid a day, and they typically measure it in a fraction of a teaspoon. And he said, I have no idea how you're still alive. And I said, well, you're not the judge for that, but Debbie is. And besides, I've got this new pair of Crocs, and I gotta wear them. So I'm in the second chair now. I'm in the middle of this thing, and I'm staring at the third chair. We're ready to go. We have a diagnosis. We've had surgery. I'm doing great, except I go home and I start vomiting for the next 2.5 weeks, profusely, all the time. And remember, I'm not allowed to bend over. Have you ever tried doing that standing up? It's not a pretty sight. And then I had a terrible pain in my side. And after 12 hours, they take me to the hospital on Christmas morning, and I'm diagnosed with kidney stones from the brain swelling medication. Excuse you. So I'm in the hospital again with kidney stones, but they can't get my kidneys to stop bleeding, which is very unusual for kidney stones. So I'm bleeding and I'm bleeding and I'm bleeding, and I'm spending more and longer time in the hospital, and they're running more and more tests, and they scan my kidneys another time, and they said, when did you throw the pulmonary emboli to your lungs? When did you throw the blood clots to your lungs? And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And they said, well, the pain must be horrific. And I said, I've been in pain since the day after surgery. So I had literally thrown these blood clots 3 weeks ago. And they say, we have to scan your lungs. So they get ready and they scan my lungs, and they prepare me for another surgery. on my kidneys. And I'm laying there on the pre-op table, and the doctor walks in, and he says, everybody out of the room now. Everybody. There's 2 or 3 nurses prepping me for surgery, and the anesthesiologist, and he's still doing his stuff, and the doctor says, I said everybody out of the room now. He looks at the anesthesiologist, and he makes the anesthesiologist leave, and he says, Eric, I don't know how to tell you this. He said, you came in the hospital with kidney stones, and you have a very, very rare form of cancer. We have the C word here because for a year, Debbie couldn't even say the word. He said, you have a very rare form called a chondrosarcoma. And now we have to consider all the junk in your lungs metastasis. And if that is true, you have less than 6 months. And we need to send you for further testing, but we have got to stop the bleeding in your kidneys.
I have to tell you, I had already made it to that 3rd chair, and I wanted to head right on out that door. We were done with this journey. The doctor had told me that he was going to be cured of everything. There was no way I was going back to that chair. I didn't want to start this journey over. And many of you have struggled with that. Many of you have beaten cancer once and had that diagnosis come again. We as caregivers, our journey is interesting. We lift our patient up, we lift our loved one up in many, many ways. We take care of medications, we take care of many of their needs. You know, it's terribly frustrating to, overcome a hill and then slide on down. But you've got to reach forward. You've got to reach out to those others around you. I earned the nickname of number 7 when I was a kid because I would just put my head down and move forward on my own. I thought I could handle just about anything. But 25 years ago, I met Eric, and we promised to love, honor, and cherish. Anyway, we promised to love, honor, and cherish each other in sickness and in health. So we were going down this journey together. But don't be afraid to reach out to those loved ones around you who want to mow your lawn, shovel your snow, maybe bring you a meal after you've been at the hospital on a long day. You don't have to go along this journey alone. Sorry.
I'll try to turn sideways here, so block that wind a little bit. So we were in the 2nd chair staring at the 3rd chair, and now we're back in the 1st chair. So they ship us out of Colorado Springs to the Rocky Mountain Cancer Center in Denver, and I see the ortho-oncologist, and I'd been bleeding out of my kidneys now for 6 weeks. I was wheezing from the blood clots in my lungs, and I walk into his office, and he takes one look at me, and he calls the hospital, and he says, get a room ready for this gentleman. I'm sending him right over. So a lot of you have been to some really big hospitals. Well, in big hospitals, you see lots of doctors. And so they wheel me over into the hospital, and they put me in the hospital room, and the first internist walks in, and they have a clipboard, and they're looking at the clipboard, and they're looking at me, and they're looking at the clipboard, and they're looking at me. And they said, we need a little help here. And I said, what do you need? And they said, well, first of all, we can't read this first word. And I said, meningoencephalocele? And they said, yeah, that one. And then they said, your diagnosis is patient doesn't look good at all. That was literally the diagnosis that the oncologist had written. And that was not very encouraging for me, I can tell you that. But long story short, I ended up spending several days in the hospital, and they did several more surgeries on my kidney. They put a filter in to stop the blood clots, and they did a biopsy on my shoulder to determine that I had to undergo a radical scapular excision, which means they removed most of my right shoulder blade from the tumor on it. Did not end up having chemo or radiation, but I did lose a lot of function in my right arm. But we were at least back in the middle chair. And we had a diagnosis, and we were moving in the right direction. And hope was in sight.
Again, I was lifted up because I was a caregiver and I could handle this. We had a diagnosis. It looked like the end was in sight, and hopefully it was. I had lots and lots of supports. There was many days that, both during and after, that I had to look inside of myself. Although those feelings that I had shoved down deep inside because I didn't want to tell anybody, I didn't want to tell him, I didn't want to deal with them. Again, like I told you, I wanted to go on down that road. I didn't want to experience this journey. But I found that I needed to talk to somebody. He and I needed to talk to somebody. Our lives had changed, and as many of you survivors know, your lives are never the same after you experience cancer. You know, you as a caregiver, your life is never the same. Don't be afraid to reach out to those others around you, and don't be afraid to look up. You know, Christ carried us through this journey in a way that many of you understand. But Eric, you've got on a hospital gown.
I do. This is my last hospital gown. The day after my surgery, well, I got to tell you, the day of my surgery, the doctor said, Eric, I don't know what I'm going to find when we get in there. And he said, if it's worse than we think, I may have to take your whole arm. It's called a 4-quarter amputation. And he said, if I have to do that, I just have to do it. So I need your permission. That is not an easy thing to decide. But the option was worse. So yeah, cover that up. Hey, no peeking. Hey, Amelia, stop. Anyway, so I wake up after my surgery. Now you need to understand, I had 11 surgeries in 9 weeks. And so every time they took me down the hall, I had to leave my wife. And that last one was the roughest. And so I remember waking up in the recovery room, and I took my left hand and I reached up and I felt that I had a hand. And I just started crying. Because I knew I could deal with the rest of it, whether it was just I was going to be able to feed myself, but at least I had a hand. Because after being in that ortho-oncologist's office, I saw a lot of people that I'm usually the only one when I go back that has all 4 limbs. And so the day after surgery, I'm laying in the hospital bed. I hooked up to my IV pole. I've got my hospital gown on. I have a catheter that I'm still bleeding out of. My arm's in a sling and a swath. And I got my Crocs on. And I'm laying in that hospital bed, and I said, it's time to get up. Enough is enough. And I began to think about some of you, all my patients for 25 years. How many times was I the first person to walk you? And how hard that was sometimes to get you out of that hospital bed and walk you to that door the first time. But we were going to do it. So I'm all prepared. I got my oxygen. I got my IV pole. I got my catheter. I got my arm in a sling. And I start shuffling to the door. And I'm shuffling. Okay, by the way, this is the 3rd chair now because the wind's behind me, okay? Just so you know. So I'm shuffling along. And I get out in the hallway, and as soon as I poke my head out in the hallway, the nurse jumps up from the nurse's station, comes running up. What are you doing up? I said, I'm going for a walk. Well, you have to wait for the physical therapist. I said, I got 2. One's not worth anything, and the other one's pretty darn good. And she goes, well, it's good to see you up. I just want you to know that it's only 26 laps around the unit to make a mile. Not the thing to tell me. I did not make it on my first try, and I did not make it on my second try. But by the end of that day, I had walked 26 laps. And I had walked 1 mile. One of the things about a story is you never tell a story that doesn't have a point, and you never make a point without telling a story. So I have told this story today, we have shared this story today to let you know that I discovered a lot of things on my cancer journey, from the beginning to the middle to the end, that cancer is not a respecter of persons. Cancer is not a respecter of age. Cancer is not a respecter of gender, nor of fitness level. But you know what? We don't have to respect cancer either. And that is what we're doing out here today. We are putting our Crocs on and we are putting one foot in front of the other to show cancer that we can beat it. And so I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today, putting one foot in front of the other to beat cancer. And I think I'm done with the hospital gown. But I also wanted to take a moment, we talk a lot about survivors, but we also have lost a lot of people to cancer. And as you go around and you see these luminarias, you see some of the names in memory of. And when I was walking around this morning on my very first survivor lap, because I earned my purple shirt, I was thinking about the fact that this is my first survivor's walk, and next year there's going to be people that weren't here this year that are going to be walking with us next year. And it was said earlier that we have to do everything we can to limit those patients. And that's what we're doing here today. But I also want to honor the caregivers, because sometimes they're a forgotten piece in this, and I certainly want to honor my caregiver, my special caregiver. And so Debbie, I bought this special pin for you. Well, actually, I just got it back there in the survivor's tent. There's a whole bowl of them, but pretend I bought this special pin for you. And I want to put this on you. And you survivors, make sure you get a caregiver pin for your caregiver and you pin it on them. So without any further ado, I would like to thank everybody for being here and just ask you that you join us back out on the track and let's make some more laps. Thank you.